I don't get the chance to talk about this very often, but I think that Lobo is fantastic. And that may surprise regular viewers of my channel given the topics that I generally tend to gravitate towards. Things like emotional complexity, despair, and ethical dilemmas. And Lobo is kind of the opposite of that. He's one of DC's most over-the-top characters, but I think that's great. In the comics, he had been a forgettable bounty hunter in an orange and purple leotard until he was given a heavy metal makeover in the early 1990s. Think more Lemmy from Motorhead than Ziggy Stardust. He's crude, rude, and has a terrible attitude. The epitome of 90s anti-heroes, and he works because he's a parody. You're not supposed to take him seriously. When I met Simon Bisley, the artist who redesigned Lobo, he told me how at the time it felt like he was working on an independent comic because DC left him and writer Alan Grant to have fun, with minimal feedback. His stories didn't have much philosophical depth, but they were meant to make you laugh. This is the man who was hired by the Easter Bunny to take down Santa Claus, who became immortal after he died and was rejected by both heaven and hell for being too wicked, and really loves space dolphins because he thinks they're cool. And this is why I'm so fond of the Superman the Animated Series two-parter, The Main Man. What's particularly impressive about this story is how the creative team successfully adapted Lobo despite the restrictions in place on children's television. He couldn't swear, drink, draw blood, or have sex, all key elements of his character in the comics, but the show managed to allude to these traits while staying within the boundaries. From the first moment we meet Lobo, shortly after Professor Hamilton gazes in wonder at the stars, wondering what colossal intellects are out there waiting to be discovered, Lobo belches, presumably after downing an intoxicating drink. Tonally, it's like a brick being thrown through a stained glass window. Within a few seconds of appearing, he's already started a bar brawl and a gunfight, which he ends by blowing the whole place up. That's the perfect distillation of Lobo right there. Sure, he doesn't drop any heavy swears or slice anyone's head off, but all of his character traits are preserved. He's a scroungy space bum on a flying motorcycle, to quote Angela Chen. And just the idea that this is the general public's first proper alien encounter really amuses me. Sure, Superman is an alien with tremendous abilities, but he passes as human, that's his whole thing. Brainiac had appeared a few episodes prior, but for most people it was only in the newspapers, and even then, he's a machine. Lobo is flesh and blood, and he walked among them and caused chaos. And this episode really shows that you don't have to be gratuitous when adapting mature, or should that be immature, characters, so long as the core traits are still present. What really makes The Main Man feel like such a turning point for the series, though, is just how confident it is about being funny. Not in a wink at the camera kind of way, although there is some of that, but it's genuinely funny. Up until this point, Superman the Animated Series had experimented with tone. There was the dark obsession of Toyman, the parasite's disturbing hunger, and the collaborative joy of a little piece of home. But this episode embraces outright farce. There's an almost anarchic energy to it. One moment Lobo is leching over Lois Lane, the next he gets socked in the jaw by Superman and is sent flying through Lex Luthor's office in the middle of a cleanup. And the humour works because the episode never stops taking Superman seriously. The Main Man understands that superhero stories can be strange, loud and playful without becoming shallow. And there genuinely was a risk that Lobo's presence and charisma might undermine Superman, but I argue that the opposite happens. Where Lobo is quick to resort to violence, Superman first talks. Where Lobo intimidates Lois Lane with his sexual advances, Superman steps in and comforts her. Where Lobo doesn't care about collateral damage, Superman puts himself in harm's way to protect others. Some of these things could come across as hokey, but there's a masterful balance of tone that prevents that from happening. In short, Lobo's presence enhances Superman and really highlights what makes him so special. Essentially, the two start out as enemies, but by the story's conclusion they have a mutual respect, of sorts, for each other after they had to work together to overcome adversity. It's your classic odd couple story. Lobo is hired by the Preserver, essentially an intergalactic zookeeper that collects species on the brink of extinction, to bring in Superman, the last Kryptonian. After Lobo succeeds, the Preserver reveals that he has one other creature on his list, the last Zarnian, who happens to be Lobo, and he's completely oblivious to the danger he's in, even as he explains that he himself is the target to Superman. And that brings me to another interesting comparison to be made between Superman and Lobo. They are both orphans and the last of their kind, but where Krypton's culture was destroyed thanks to a geological disaster, Zarnia was decimated by Lobo. He chose to kill every single person on his planet as part of a high school project, which of course he gave himself top marks for. Lobo has no interest in culture, history or preservation. He just follows his own whims. He identifies himself as the main man, the protagonist in the story, in all stories, and he couldn't abide there being anyone else like him, undermining him just by existing. Similarly, where Superman always goes out of his way to protect life, Lobo commodifies it as a bounty hunter. They both have a sense of justice, it's just Lobo's is a bit harder to justify. That's not to say that he is without any redeeming qualities. He has a very strict code of honor. Once he promises to do something, he'll stop at nothing to achieve it. But he does not play well with others. After Superman breaks free from his enclosure, Lobo begs Superman to help him escape too, and resorts to threats. Superman makes him promise to leave Earth alone in exchange for his help. Of course, Lobo's brand of assistance is unconventional. When the pair need to think up a distraction to escape, Lobo simply shoves Superman into their enemy's path. Hey, and it works, but it wasn't exactly what Superman was talking about. And when Superman is ensnared by a giant space snake, Lobo just stands by and watches, waiting to see how Superman will get out of it. He has to be asked to help, reminded of his debt to Superman before he begrudgingly intervenes, and in such an extreme way, ripping the skin off of the snake. Ouch! Until this point, Superman had been dealing with terrestrial threats. Even Brainiac's weaponry was kind of familiar, just advanced machinery really. But the main man is the story that propelled Superman to the stars and really opened the series up in a way that its predecessor, Batman the Animated Series, never could. Up until then, villains tended to reflect human flaws, greed, envy, and obsession. But out among the stars, Superman encounters alien cultures, different kinds of morality, and a little bit of absurdity. This expands the scope of the universe overnight. The Preserver is a very good example of the different kind of villainy on display here too. He's not driven by greed or revenge. In fact, on paper his intentions sound almost noble. They're right there in his name. He wants to preserve creatures that are about to go extinct. But there's something uncomfortable about the way he goes about it. The beings under his care are technically alive, but they aren't really living. They're sealed away in tiny artificial environments reduced to exhibits. Their worlds are shrunk down into dioramas. Superman is treated less like a person with thoughts, feelings and autonomy, and more like a rare artifact to be catalogued and admired. That's what makes the Preserver such an effective villain. In his own twisted way, he reveres life, especially endangered life, but his admiration is possessive. He loves creatures in the same way someone might love a painting or a fossil. He wants to freeze them in time, to own them and stop them from ever changing or slipping away. Funnily enough, this is a character trait that had belonged to the comic book version of Brainiac, who collected civilizations by shrinking cities down and keeping them in bottles. This trait was reimagined for the DCAU version, who simply collected their data before destroying them all. But it's nice to see the idea being reused here. At the same time, there are obvious parallels to real-world zoos and conservation efforts. Humanity absolutely has prevented certain species from vanishing through captivity programs, and I don't think the episode is naive enough to pretend that the issue is simple. But it does ask an uncomfortable question. Is survival alone enough? What kind of existence is it to spend your life in a carefully maintained enclosure, safe but stripped of freedom? And that idea directly ties into Superman himself. Because Superman is the last Kryptonian, and throughout the series there's always this temptation to treat him less like a man and more like an aspirational symbol. The Preserver just takes that idea to an extreme. To him, Superman is the final surviving specimen of a dead civilization. He completely ignores anything else that defines Superman, reducing him down to an object. He places Superman in a replica of a Kryptonian home, completely ignoring the fact that Superman has no memories or experience of Krypton and its culture. It'd be akin to taking a modern-day resident of Rome and plonking them in a marble temple in a toga. It may be well-intentioned, but it's actually quite disrespectful. However, what I find most intriguing, and this is where you get the slightly more in-depth analysis that I know you all love, is the Preserver's own hidden nature. For most of the episode, he presents himself as this serene, soft-spoken, floating creature. He seems ancient and fragile, almost monk-like. The design is intentionally disarming. You look at him and assume that he is harmless. Then in one grotesque moment, the truth literally claws its way out from inside him. This gigantic snarling beast erupts from his own body, tearing free from his mouth in a scene that feels closer to an alien horror film than a Saturday morning cartoon. Even Lobo is visibly disturbed by it. And I think that transformation is symbolic. The monstrous creature inside the Preserver is the ugly truth hidden beneath his polite language and cultured exterior. Beneath all the talk of preservation and protection is the fact that he preserves life because he cannot bear the thought of letting anything go. And in this sense, he's also a parallel to Lobo. But the difference is that Lobo doesn't care what happens to his targets after they've been handed over and he gets his money. Which fittingly makes him the perfect villain for Superman's first true journey into the wider universe of weird and wonderful figures. Ultimately though, it's the Preserver's obsession and his attention to detail that leads to his downfall. He kept Superman's enclosure bathed in the light of a red sun, removing his powers, but he also created a biome for the last dodo, complete with a yellow sun, which restored them. All these things combined are why I think that The Main Man remains such a memorable episode. Yes, it is funny, chaotic, and seeing Superman team up with a cigar-chomping space biker who skins giant snakes for fun is undeniably entertaining. But beneath all of that noise is a story about Superman stepping into a much larger universe for the first time. Up until this point, Superman the Animated Series had mostly dealt with familiar dangers. Gangsters, experiments gone wrong, and powerful businessmen. But The Main Man throws Superman into a galaxy populated by bounty hunters, alien emperors, grotesque monsters, and obsessive collectors. It shows us how the universe is stranger and infinitely more unpredictable than what we've seen before, while highlighting how Superman still fits perfectly within it. And fittingly, it's Lobo that helps usher the series into this new era. A character that on paper should have been impossible to adapt into a children's cartoon, wound up becoming the perfect catalyst for the show's evolution. Because beneath all that juvenile behaviour, Lobo represents the idea that superhero stories can be sincere without becoming stiff. They can be ridiculous without becoming shallow. They can embrace the weirdest corners of comic book storytelling and still have something significant to say. And honestly, for a loudmouth space biker who was never supposed to be taken seriously, there are few better guides to the chaos of the wider DC universe than The Main Man himself. Okay, that's it for this essay. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to like, share, comment, tell all your friends about me. Oh yeah, and most importantly, do subscribe if you're not already, because I know only about 30% of my viewers are actually subscribed. If you really enjoyed the essay, then you might want to consider picking up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery, available globally on Amazon. As you can see, it has a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background painter John Calmette. There is a foreword written by series director Dan Reber. It has 22 essays about a number of villains from the show, including an exclusive one about the Condiment King that I will never make into a video, not because I dislike him, but because I want to give the readers something exclusive. There's also a very moving segment in here by the late Kevin Conroy, who shared these words with me after my grandfather died. It was about life, death, the immortal soul, and they hit very differently now that Kevin is no longer with us. Finally, I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month, and this gets you early access to my video essays, usually about a month of early access. Huge thanks to all of my members, you help to make these videos possible. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I mostly talk about DC's Absolute Comics, but I do like to talk about other things from time to time, even if other people don't like watching them. Next time, I'll be back on Friday, where ahead of the release of the new Supergirl movie, I want to talk about the DCAU version of the character and how she struggled with the weight of expectation. And next Monday, I want to discuss a controversial episode of Justice League Unlimited that changed the underlying message of Batman Beyond forever. Yes, it is time to discuss Epilogue. Hope to see you then.